Thank you, Daniel. Our final session of the day is a very forward-looking one, discussing what it would take to build another lignite-fired power plant here in North Dakota, and what that would mean to the grid. Joshua Stanislowski leads a multidisciplinary team of scientists and engineers focused on research, development, and commercialization of innovative energy technologies as they relate to coal utilization and emissions, carbon management, and alternative fuels and renewable energy. Previously, Stanislowski served as a principal process engineer in the Energy Systems Development Group at EERC. Stanislowski holds MS and BS degrees in chemical engineering from UND. Please welcome Joshua.
All right, well, thank you, Kevin. Thank you very much. I appreciate everybody sticking around for the last session of the conference. I will say it is quite the honor. It is quite bright up here, actually. But it is quite the honor to be able to anchor or close out, I should say, the conference that represents the 50th anniversary of the Lignite Energy Council. Although, Kevin, I will say I'm a bit disappointed. So, you know, when the Minnesota Twins closer, Joan Duran, comes out, the lights go down, you start seeing pictures of fire, you get all this music going. Maybe next year we should be thinking about doing something like that. The Twins are not playing right now. That is correct. But yeah, and my fastball's not that good either. So anyway, let's go ahead and move on here. So, no, again, appreciate the time. I think most of you are probably familiar with EERC, just based on all the various conversations that we've had over the week. But yeah, we are a research and development center located in Grand Forks, North Dakota. That's where I'm from. That's where I've actually lived most of my life. So it's great to be here in Bismarck. Talking to you guys again. I was here in 2018, actually, talking to you guys about the economic impacts of CO2 capture. And we're gonna have some of that in here as well. And so really what we want to look at today, though, is, what is the next generation of lignite-fired facilities going to look like? But more importantly, what are the hurdles that need to be overcome? And really, why do we need to do this? Why is this so important? So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. Just a quick disclaimer there. We'll cruise through that. And so really the goals of this study, and this is actually language, and I apologize, it's a bit wordy there, but this is the exact language that we received from the North Dakota legislature in terms of what this study needs to accomplish. And so you can see things like demand forecast for dispatchable energy. Dispatchable energy is really a key theme of this study and what we need to be looking at. Economic impact, of course, is always very important. Anytime we build a facility like this, we are going to have a very positive impact on our economy in a wide variety of ways. And so gonna show you guys some data on that. And then, what are other factors that we need to be thinking about as well? And so as I sat down with Mike and Jason and others from the LEC to understand, what should this study really be focused on? It was very clear from the get-go that this wasn't going to be just a technology study, right? We are going to look at technologies and get an understanding of what's needed and what needs to be done there. But really, there's a lot of other factors: permitting, regulatory hurdles, fair access to financing, insurance. What kind of co-products can we make? All those kinds of things are very important. Now, I'm a tech guy, and so I'm going to start talking to you guys about like power demand forecasts and stuff. As a chemical engineer, that's not my comfort zone, but hopefully you guys can bear with me on this. But evaluating needs for future power generation and demand growth. It's really important to understand. We've heard so many talks today about things like data centers and other things that are going to take up that demand growth. And we got to make sure that we build those systems responsibly, such that we're also not harming the general consumers of electricity in the region. And then lastly, we did engage industry members for input. And so engaging with members of the Lignite Energy Council, understanding what their concerns are, what their needs are, that was really a key piece of this study. We met with them a couple of times, got those inputs, and actually just on Monday, we did issue the draft final report for the members. So for those of you members out there, please encourage you to take a look, provide comments to that draft report. It's not over yet. We've still got time to make a lot of changes on it if you guys want to see that. So please take a look at it. It's 218 pages, but we did try to put a lot of that stuff in the appendix too. So, it should definitely be interesting reading for you all. So one of the questions, that I kind of wanted to answer too was, well, why Lignite? And I think the demands of the power grid, I think we understand this, demands of the power grid require that we have dispatchable, reliable baseload resources available when they are needed, And so, just looking at the generation mix in North Dakota, and I was even a little surprised by this, but we do have quite a bit of wind power in North Dakota itself, to where you're looking at, 44% wind, 42% coal generation, a little bit of natural gas, but that's generation capacity. That's not actually actual generation. And so the graph on your right shows the actual generation of power in North Dakota. You can see while the wind fraction certainly has been increasing over the years, you can also see that it's certainly not 44% of the overall generation mix. And so again, that's because wind's an intermittent resource and just doesn't blow all the time. If we look at the wider region, this is for MISO and SPP. So on the left there, 191 gigawatts of generation capacity in MISO. About 16% of that is actually wind power with 25% coal. And then you've got SPP with about 29% wind power, and I believe that was 24% coal-fired power as well. So there's certainly a wide variety of generation up on the grid, and things like wind, solar certainly are playing their part. MISO actually has an app that you can put on your phone, and so if you're ever curious, you can take a look at this app on your phone, and actually it'll tell you right now what the generation mix is in the region. It's kind of a cool thing, and so last Friday I actually pulled this off of my phone and put the screenshot on here. So the one on the left there showing the 80 gigawatts there of demand. And if you look at that, you can see, it was a mild day, I guess, for fall in North Dakota. There was some breeze blowing, so we had a little bit of wind power. The two graphs, though, on the right actually do show, and this is courtesy of Faces of North Dakota Coal. Mark Pierce does a nice job putting some of this information out there and helping to inform people. But the two graphs on the right, those are actually during really warm times during the summer when there was no wind blowing. And as you can see, coal and natural gas with some nuclear in there are really bearing the load for the power grid. And when that power was very much needed the most during these really hot days, the wind wasn't blowing and the wind just wasn't there. So certainly shows why we do need these dispatchable resources for our power grid. And then I saw this information. I kind of thought this was fascinating. It certainly doesn't account for all the energy use within data centers and that sort of thing. But we saw a nice talk on ChatGPT and all the cool things that it can do. But when it comes to power demand and how much it's going to take to power these new AI tools that we spent, a long time hearing about this morning, you can see that a traditional Google search is about 0.3 watt hours of power. So, relatively modest energy consumption. But you start moving down the right to these AI-based tools, and now you're looking at 10 to 30 times the power consumption per search. And I was surprised to find, so we do 99,000 Google searches per second. So since I've started this talk, I think there's been something like 50 million Google searches conducted worldwide, right? So it is crazy just how much energy actually these searches are consuming. And if we increase that by 10 to 30 times, that's certainly going to be a lot of demand out there that we're going to have to meet. And so active data centers in North Dakota, you can see we've got several there totaling something like 500-600 megawatts of demand that's currently right now. The map that's shown on there is a study that was conducted by EPRI, and that actually shows that by 2030, according to this study anyway, we're expecting more than 20% of the power generated in North Dakota to be going to data centers. And some of the numbers that we heard yesterday, like 18 gigawatts of power potentially is being talked about at this moment. Of course, it's not going to be 18 gigawatts, but those are huge power demands that we're going to be seeing. And so glad we've been having the conversation, certainly this week, but we need to continue these conversations and understand how can we deploy these data centers responsibly so that it doesn't hurt consumers. Because as we start looking forward at demand growth. The graph on the left there, that's our historical demand growth in just the state of North Dakota. And really the growth has been driven by commercial and industrial users from 2000 to 2022 there. And then the two graphs on the right are actually forecasted demand, forecasted peak demand for SPP and MISO. And so you can see, let's focus on the MISO region, for example. Between 130 and 140 gigawatts is the forecasted peak demand for MISO. Now, right now, in the MISO region, we have 149 gigawatts of dispatchable power. So when the wind's not blowing, sun's not shining, that's what we have available. So we're already getting very close to that peak demand that we might see in the summertime. But then, for example, and we're going to show some slides here that talk about, the Biden administration push on coal and assumptions that things are going to shut down. But if we didn't have that coal power, we'd only have 101 gigawatts of dispatchable power available. We wouldn't be able to meet our power needs during peak demand times. And so certainly very much a concern for all of us, really, in trying to meet these demands. And then, again, I'm not an expert in resource adequacy and all those kinds of things, but the green line there basically represents where we should be in terms of our reserve margin, and the blue line represents where we're forecasted to be. And as of right now, MISO is forecasted to be below that green line by 2028. And so that's a little bit of a scary thought as well. And some of that is based on forecasted closures, that sort of thing. So we need to be not only keeping our coal systems running, but we need to be starting to add to the generation mix to ensure that we have adequate power supplies for generations to come. So how can Lignite play a role? And I think technology advancement certainly is going to play a key factor in that. We currently use about 80% of our lignite for electricity generation. The remainder mainly is over at Dakota Gas, where they're making synthetic natural gas, they're making fertilizers, a myriad of other products. And so just kind of going into that a little bit more, I know we've talked about these guys quite a bit, but really the point here is that, and the previous speaker discussed it as well, there's a lot of different things we can make from coal, and I think we really need to be looking at it as a resource, a carbon ore that can make all these different things. But right now with Dakota Gasification, they are making low carbon fertilizer. That's something that's not really advertised, right? But I think it's something that really needs to be touted for the world to see. So just looking at a potential polygeneration plant, and again, I said I wasn't going to focus too much on technology, so we'll try to cruise through here pretty quickly, but really what we're seeing is the ability to take this North Dakota lignite, this carbon ore, and then do some pre-processing on it, extracting those rare earth elements that are going to be critical for things like national security in the future to ensure that we have the materials that we need to build things like airplanes and radars and whatever else it might be. So taking that, extracting rare earth elements, but then also using the carbon in that coal to make things like graphite, graphene. The battery industry is immensely reliable on graphite right now, and if we're going to grow that industry, lignite can actually play a pretty significant role in making things like battery anodes. And so we need to be looking at processes like that before the coal even goes into the conversion system. And so from there, then you can take it into a combustor, you take it into a gasifier, and now you're going to make your CO2, which is going to be available for enhanced oil recovery, other potential processes, and the ashes that you produce, assuming you didn't get all the critical minerals out to begin with, you have another opportunity for extraction of additional critical materials. And that really comes down to technology and where do you think it's going to be easiest to be able to extract those materials. And then as we look at combustion, combustion advancements have been made. Ultra supercritical combustion, well, now they're up to advanced ultra supercritical. I don't know if they're going to keep adding buzzwords in front of those descriptors or not as they get higher temperatures and pressures within those steam lines. But looking at North Dakota lignite, we're probably with the traditional ultra supercritical systems, that's probably what we'd look at if we were going to be just looking at building a standard combustor. We don't think we can go higher in temperature than that, just due to maybe some of the ash melting problems, that sort of thing. But those are potential targets there that we need to be looking at. And then for current projects too, I wanted to mention too, it's immensely important that, Milton R. Young, Coal Creek Station, these guys are both looking at CO2 capture, and CO2 I think is going to actually help pave the way for building this next generation lignite plant, simply because of the value of the CO2 itself. And so you look at these two facilities combined, we're looking at approximately 13 million tons a year of CO2. But some of the studies that we've done previously have shown 13 million tons a year is a drop in the bucket compared to what our oil fields actually need. And so this study showed 358 million tons of CO2 just in our conventional fields. This isn't even thinking about the Bakken. Now, we actually have a study that's just being wrapped up at EERC that's looking at how much CO2 the Bakken needs. And I can tell you that number could be an order of magnitude higher than what we're seeing here for this study. But that CO2 then could be used to produce up to a billion barrels of incremental oil. And so, again, that's additional tax revenue out of our existing assets. Those are really, really important things. I wanted to touch on this quickly because I'd be remiss not to mention the potential for biomass and coal working together to really offset carbon emissions. And I'm not going to go through this whole graph here, but all the way on the right side, what this study from the National Energy Technology Laboratory is showing is that if you bring in 35% biomass with 90% carbon capture, you're actually at a net carbon negative type of a situation. And so if you exceed that, you can actually be generating power, generating megawatts of power, putting it on the grid, and actually removing CO2 from the atmosphere while you're doing that. You can't get to carbon negative with wind power, but actually coal and biomass mix could get us to that point. So just an immensely important point, especially as we think about the nexus between our energy and ag sectors. This is a role that could be played in North Dakota with our crop residues. So what will it cost? The billion-dollar question, right? And I think that CO2 really can provide those avenues for cost competitiveness. And so we do have a couple incentives out there right now in terms of the Section 45 tax credits. 45Q. And so really what we're looking at here is $60 to $85 per ton based on how you store it. So if you do dedicated storage in a deep saline formation, $85 a ton. If you use that CO2 for EOR, you can get $60 per ton. But presumably you could also generate an additional revenue stream by actually selling that CO2 to the oil field. And so, just some back of the envelope math, then 5 million tons of CO2 per year, that's $425 million a year in revenue. And so that's a pretty significant revenue stream. And you can claim these credits for 12 years. And so we start looking at the costs, and I hope those numbers are big enough for you guys to see, and it looks like the highlights are okay. So the three yellow highlights and the two below are the green highlights, but the three yellow highlights are really comparable cases for, here's the overnight cost of building a new coal facility in terms of dollars per kilowatt. We're looking at 650 megawatt facilities approximately, and really the three highlights in yellow are just three different sources of information with three very different estimates in terms of what that's going to cost. And so that's part of what we're trying to rectify here as well. What is that actual cost going to be? But if we do the math on those numbers, you are looking at 3 to 5 billion for a new lignite-fired facility with carbon capture and storage, and that's again a 650 megawatt net generating facility, which obviously that's a pretty high dollar amount. But if you start doing the math again on that CO2, you're looking at the potential to sell $5 billion worth of CO2. That takes a big chunk out of that capital investment that you had to make to begin with, and certainly could be used in your business case when trying to sell a project like this. The two numbers on the bottom, those green highlights, those are kind of the competition, so to speak, as far as dispatchable baseload power with natural gas combined cycle being cheaper, showing there, and then the nuclear power being actually significantly more expensive for a 600 megawatt small modular nuclear. And the major disadvantage there of nuclear, though, then it does not have CO2 available to sell that it's producing, and so it doesn't have an avenue like a lignite coal would to actually recover those costs. So some pretty interesting information there. So what are the hurdles then? Regulations and policy. And so we heard Drew Wrigley speaking this morning, talking about some of these regulations. He does a much better job than I do, so I'm certainly not going to go into all of these in detail. We do have about 100 pages of the report just dedicated to the regulations and such that you need to get through in order to be able to permit a plant like this. But the one thing I did want to highlight there is the greenhouse gas emission regulations. And so looking, this rule, May 9th, 2024, kind of a day that will live in infamy, right? I mean, that's when these rules came out, and they really are a major attack on the coal industry, very, very much so, basically saying that by 2032, you must have 90% carbon capture and storage on your facility, or you force facing fines or shutting down. The really curious thing about this rule, though, is that this is only for existing facilities. It actually does not apply to new facilities because the EPA just assumed, well, nobody's going to actually build a new facility, so we don't even really need to address that, right? So technically speaking, a new coal facility would have to hit somewhere in the 20 to 23% capture based on the 2015 rule that was put into effect. So kind of an interesting nuance. I'm sure they would attempt to close the loop on that. And just kind of some more information on that, really looking at, so they kind of started categorizing units based on how long they think they're going to be open. And so they're saying a short-term unit cease operations before January 1, 2032, well, then you don't have to do anything. So they're basically saying, well, just go ahead and shut down, or we're going to force you to put carbon capture on these systems. So it's really, really an unfortunate situation. There's a definition for midterm units there. And then long-term units, really, if you are planning to continue operations beyond 2039, then you must have 90% CCS in place by 2032. And so that's only 8 years down the road. That's not a long time to be able to get a project like that done if you're starting from scratch right now. So certainly puts a lot of pressure. And so we did join in with other Republican attorneys general and took part in a lawsuit to stop this legislation, and certainly hoping for success in that endeavor, as well, as it's certainly critical for us. Financing challenges. We actually didn't find a lot in terms of, are there banks out there that are saying, no, we're not going to finance coal? Yeah, there are some, but there's actually a lot that haven't really addressed it necessarily. That maybe, at least in a public fashion, right? We don't necessarily know what they're saying internally. But so we think there is financing available for coal projects. But if you actually went ahead and announced, I'm going to build a new coal-fired power plant, I think that would change the game a little bit in terms of how the banks are feeling and whether they would be willing to come in with financing. And then the other question is, well, would CCS make a difference? So if you're saying, well, we're going to build a new plant, but it's going to have carbon capture and storage, is that going to make a difference to the financer? I think it would, but all of that remains to be seen once we work to announce something. And then insurance. And so a survey done by the Lignite Energy Council actually did show members were reporting in the last few years a 10% to 300% increase in some insurance rates. And so certainly that's something that's difficult to deal with. ESG was identified as a driver in that. So there are a lot of carriers that are exiting the fossil fuel industry as far as insurance goes. When you have less competition, prices go up. That's just kind of a general thing there. So really the key recommendation there is I do think we need to look at, collaborations and kind of figure out how can we help ourselves as a group. It's probably not going to be any one utility that comes in and says, we're going to do this. It's probably going to be a group of us. So I think working as a group on this issue as well is certainly going to be key. So what are the benefits of a next generation lignite power facility? Of course, the CO2 for EOR is one, dispatchable power another one, but jobs. Jobs are certainly an important aspect of that as well. And like I said, back in 2018, I talked about this particular topic for about a half an hour, but just in the interest of time here, I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but when we look at jobs creation, you look at the jobs that are created, by construction workers, but then you look at all the suppliers that are supplying materials to those construction workers, that's more jobs, and then you've got things like food, shelter, transportation that creates those induced impacts as well. So we see a lot of job impacts as we look at the potential for, if we were to build a 650 megawatt plant with carbon capture and storage, this is kind of a high level initial take on what that job creation is going to be. But we're looking at 8,000 jobs during construction and probably estimating a 3 to 5 year construction period on a facility such as this. So 8,000 jobs per year, that's a pretty good number. And then for plant employment then, looking at, 80 direct jobs at the plant, but then there's all these, again, indirect and induced effects that come into play. And total economic impact, the very bottom right number there, somewhere in the $200 million range just for for having that plant in your community. So certainly some good and encouraging numbers there. I'm going to skip over the state revenue in the interest of time. So yeah, what have we learned? What's next? And so really key takeaways, I think lignite generation is the backbone of our electric grid here in North Dakota, is going to continue to be for quite some time. So very important that we keep this very important resource for MISO, for SPP, keep this going so that we have power when we need it. Certainly we have technology options out there to build highly efficient generation systems. I think we need to look at some of those in more detail, as well as the gasification polygeneration aspect of it, so making all of these very important products from lignite coal as well. And yeah, critical minerals, I mean, I think you're going to see critical minerals probably start popping up in the news more and more. What we've heard from the Department of Defense, Charlie was talking about this yesterday, extremely important from a national security perspective. And so if we can make those materials right here in North Dakota, while then going on to generate power, I think that would be a really huge success story for us. But bottom line there too, regulatory certainty. That's certainly something that's very important. The November election here is going to have a big impact, I think, on that. And as Max said, I think yesterday, I can't make financial decisions based on uncertainty or based on winning or losing a lawsuit, right? I got to run a business, and so I really need that certainty in order to be able to make these decisions and push these new technologies forward. And so then what else do we need? Well, we need to get those incentives that can help bridge that gap to help close these, we've got high construction costs for putting this facility together. So what kind of incentives are out there? Is the Department of Defense interested in what we're doing because we can, provide them with a consistent, secure source of rare earth minerals? I think that's something to consider. Certainly a statutory framework that really allows utilities. Utilities traditionally don't generate power, but then also sell some other product, right? And so we need to be thinking through what is the best way to be able to do that. Basin did it with Dakota Gasification. Are there other business models that can work there? And then incentives to enable CO2 capture and delivery for EOR, so things like pipelines, infrastructure incentives, that sort of thing. And then one thing I wanted to really touch on too was understanding the impact of industrial demand growth over the next 5 years, and what truly is going to be the impact to the grid, and how are we going to respond to that. And so we did, and this is my last slide here, but we did commission a study with the North Dakota Industrial Commission here, just started it here in September, taking a very heavy look at data centers, AI, and the grid integration challenges. And so that study is scheduled to be completed next June, and really would love to come and present you guys the results of that as well, because I think that's really a big open question right now that's on a lot of different people's minds, as far as if we have a data center that's taking up gigawatts of demand, what is that going to do to our industrial consumers, and what are we going to do if we don't have enough power? Are we going to shut that data center down to make sure people can heat or cool their homes? I mean, I would certainly hope so in a time like that. But anyway, I think it's going to be really glad that the North Dakota Industrial Commission is supportive of this study, and really interested to see what kind of results we can get as far as what should be the pathway forward to responsibly deploy these types of systems in North Dakota. So I'll end there, and if there's time, happy to take any questions.